Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 372 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on what is radicalisation and what are the signs of radicalisation in children. And it is Saturday, 30th of August 2025 as I record this. So today's podcast episode covers a topic that we rarely look at, and it's the brilliant forensic psychology topic of radicalisation. Because, as I talk about in today's podcast episode, now traditionally we tend to think of this as children being radicalised by Islamic extremists, but that's a very old-fashioned way of looking at it, because now children, adults, young people, everyone in between, everyone is at a risk of being radicalised by the far right, white supremacists, misogynists, incels, and a whole bunch of other conspiracy theories too, and a lot of other extremist ideologies. Extremist ideologies have always been way broader than Islamic extremism, but it's only now we're starting to recognise that. So, especially if you want to work in an education setting, this is why you've actually got to learn about radicalisation, the signs, and how to protect children. In fact, I'm actually doing today's podcast episode because I was sent some interview questions in advance for an interview I have at a school next week, and radicalisation was one of the questions. And I thought, hey, what better reason to create a podcast episode than for an interview? So by the end of today's podcast episode, you'll learn what is radicalisation, what is the process of radicalisation, what are the signs of radicalisation, and many more fascinating topics. So you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is: a mutation doesn't change our body map after all. For a long time, scientists have believed that the brain reorganizes itself when we lose a limb, repurposing regions that allow us to censor and move the amputated body part. Some work in Rovin macans, I can never remember how you actually say that, but they're monkeys, I'm just going to say monkeys, with damage to the nerves in the arm, for example, provided seemingly solid evidence for this. Researchers observed that regions of the brain, usually reserved for arm-related sensations, will only respond to sensations on the face sometime after their injury. Now, a team of scientists has conducted research with humans to check whether this long-standing theory is true. In the new publication in Nature Neuroscience, Hunter Scow and colleagues report that chronicle representation of lost limbs actually remain remarkably stable even after years after the initial amputation. Not only does this investigation seemingly upend a long-held belief across cognitive disciplines, but it could lead to new targets for interventions treating phantom pain and offer new possibilities for developers of next-generation prosthetics. So this article I think is quite mind-blowing because one of my favourite psychology studies, so back in sixth form, which is the UK education option between the ages of 16 and 18 years old, I studied the International Baccalaureate, and in IB Psychology, in the Biological Psychology unit, one of the second things that you learn is neuroplasticity, and I fell in love with this original neuroplasticity study that shows it's something along the lines of if you chop off a finger of one of the monkeys, then over time, you can see that the brain regions for the surrounding fingers actually grows and repurposes the area in the brain, because that brain region responsible for the amputated finger is no longer being used, so the brain rewires itself. And I've always fell in love with that study. So this does raise a lot of interesting questions from my point of view. I'm not going to go into the clinical applications, because phantom pain isn't an area that I'm too familiar with, even though I really should change that in the future. So I think that something that I would quite like to know about is, why do these monkeys show this neuroplasticity and humans don't? Is there a reason? Or was this faulty research in the beginning? So that should be investigated. Also, I'm really glad that there's a lot of applied applications already being thought about, because that's what I always harp on about for the podcast. Yes, psychology research is amazing. We always should be researching and pushing the boundary and our knowledge further and further. But the issue is, we've always got to be able to apply this to everyday life, and just so we can improve our people's lives, decrease their distress, and help them take back control of their lives. So that's really important. And that's what I'm really glad that people are starting to consider the interventions for treating phantom pain, and offer new possibilities for developers of next generation prosthetics. So really interesting and exciting times ahead. So the second one is, looks like they're shy. Even from early in a pregnancy, the way expectant parents think and feel about their baby can shape caregiving. Research has also shown that prenatal care visits, especially ultrasounds, can be one influence on these perceptions. A single comment, whether that a baby seems stubborn or happy as a clam, can leave a lasting impression. A new study looks more closely at how language can shape parents' mental images of their baby, and the potential ripple effect of their early child-parent relationship. Writing in communication psychology, Kaylin E. Hill and colleagues find that negative descriptions of a baby's at prenatal appointments predict higher levels of reported behavioural difficulties in toddlerhood, and that statements from healthcare providers directly influence how people perceive their baby's personality. Oh wow, so this is quite a shocking one. And, well, no, not so much shocking, but I'm quite amazed by this, because this, I think, has some quite heartbreaking applications. Because, for starters, why you would say a negative comment about someone's baby is beyond me. Why would you, just because parents are so excited, they're so happy, they're so looking forward to being a parent? Of course, I know that's a generalization, and some parents are not. Focusing on the general stereotype here though, the idea that someone could say a negative comment about the unborn baby, I think is just heartbreaking, because why would you insert a baby? They've done nothing wrong. So there's that aspect. But another aspect is that when I was reading this article, my mind went towards all authority, because the people who would do ultrasounds, they are professionals, and they're wearing a white lab coat. So an expectant parent who is probably going to feel very overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious about being a parent, maybe for the first time, maybe for the second or third or fourth time. They are going to trust what the medical professional says. And to be honest, if I was an expectant parent and someone read into my baby's behaviour, I would probably be like, right, you're the professional, you've got all the qualifications, you must know what you're talking about. So I think that could possibly play into it. So I think on an applied point of view, we would need to be very careful and much more wary and aware of what we say, how our so-called harmless comments can impact our parents, And now that we know this, I think that we've got to spread the word to healthcare providers, but also I think we've also got to create some sort of intervention to sort of overcome the damage, because let's face it, this has been going on for ages. The healthcare professionals have probably been innocently making some negative comments from time to time about someone's baby. That's left a lasting impression, and the negative comments lead to higher chances of behavioural difficulties in toddlerhood. So now what do we do about this? How do we help the parents? How do we help the toddlers who at no fault of their own, who have had a negatively impacted parent-child relationship? So just something to think about. Just some food for thought. So the last one is, spotting sickness primes us to fight infection. If you see someone coughing and spluttering, it makes sense to give them a wide berth. This type of interaction, which reduces the chance that you're getting affected, is part of what's been termed as the behavioural immune system. But what if just perceiving a sick person didn't just make us want to keep our distance, but what if it could also prime us to fight off infection? A preemptive gearing up of the immune system could, in theory, help you stay in the clear if you haven't moved away quickly enough. In new research in natural neuroscience, Sarah at the University of Lausanne and colleagues find evidence that this might be the case. And when it comes up to giving up the immune system, perception plays an important role. Okay, so there's not actually a great amount of that I can say about this one, because the applied implications, there's not that many, but this is sort of very important function. And where my mind goes immediately is the idea of evolutionary psychology, because I know a lot of our perceptions when it comes to illness are an evolved behavioural response. And some of my favourite studies include Fester 2006. That's a brilliant study. I really recommend that you read it if you can. Or if you want to know more about evolutionary psychology, then please check out my book, Biological Psychology, available in all the usual places. But this is why I love this podcast. It's why I love psychology, because you're always learning surprising new things. And the idea that your immune system can actually gear up just because of your perception is brilliant and fascinating. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week has been really busy for lots of different reasons. So first of all, the audio booth has been built. We are now back in my audio booth, and I'm very happy with it. Me and my dad spent a lot of hours this week building it, because it had to be collapsible, and my mum did not want it to be put up all by the time like it was before. So we've got lots of electrical conduit, the sort of plastic metal pipes, and I cannot explain it, to be honest, but it's really good. There will be some tweaks that I make, because right now I've already had to adjust the height of my mic. I think I'm going to have to lower my laptop, because my mic is covering most of the screen, which does make it quite difficult to read at times. But I'm really glad that the audio booth is done. In today's podcast episode and the 10 YouTube shorts I'm going to be recording after this, but I might go up at like 15, just about me testing it, seeing how do I like it, and what I might want to change. But I'm really, really glad that it's done. In other news, I forgot to job in interviews in the next 2 weeks. So one is to be a learning support assistant, which I'm really looking forward to. And then the other one is a residential support worker. So we're working with children and young people in residential care. So both of them are going to give me the sort of clinical experience I'm sort of looking for, and that'd be really good though. And me working in like education with like younger people and like children is really useful, and it's just what I'm used to through my outreach work. So hopefully both of them go really well. And then in like other news, I'm still working on like lots of different projects through my writing, my business projects, and I've also been preparing a few other books, including Healing as a Survivor and I Am Not a Victim, I Am a Survivor. So they were two of my sexual violence focus books based on my personal healing and some other stuff, but I'll do proper podcast episodes on them in the future. But what I wanted to mention was that yes, these books were really hard to write, really hard to put together, but I'm really glad that I have, because they give me lots of opportunities. One for my own healing and me processing what happened to me, but also in terms of a different podcast to this. This is what I actually wanted to mention it in this personal update. So for ages, I've not done podcasts in attitudes because I've not been very self-confident. I thought I would stutter a lot, and I thought I would just be horrific at doing and leading a conversation. Through my outreach work, through my presenting, I've actually really grown in confidence. I'm a really good public speaker these days, and I've actually been commended on how I always know or how knowledgeable I am of my audience, so I'm able to think about the questions and the information that they want to know and to make sure that it gets addressed. So now I'm actually thinking, I actually do want to do a lot more in those. I want to do a lot more speaking, so that's just something that I want to think about. So the question this week that I want you to think about is, what's stopping you? Whether it's a job role, whether it's exploring a new career path, whether it's a new hobby, a new role in your mental health service, what's stopping you from going after it? What's stopping you from applying? Because what stopped me from wanting to do podcasts these was confidence, self-doubt, self-criticism, and self-esteem. So just something to think about and reflect on this week. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me at connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always either comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet on Twitter at sci-fi Wiley. Leave a comment on the Facebook post at Connor Whiteley Psychology Author. And I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And also, please feel free to send pictures of where you're listening from. I always love to hear where all of you are listening from all over the world. And today's podcast episode has been sponsored by Forensic Psychology of Terrorism and Hostage Taking. So this is a great sponsor for today's episode because radicalisation always comes back to terrorism and hostage taking, and especially because domestic terrorism is starting to become a lot more of a focus and is thriving in recent decades, especially with the fifth wave of terrorism being a lone wolf attacks, which is where like misogyny, incels, mass shootings driven by these extremist ideologies are really becoming quite important to focus on, research, and most importantly support, because yes, when someone's exposed to extremist ideology and they're starting to believe in it, and they actually want to take action in the name of their so-called cause, that's when we need to support them, treat them. And sometimes this is about mental health difficulties. It's also about showing them that these extremist ideologies are just taking advantage of them. So it's really important that we understand terrorism, why terrorism isn't always about mental health, and there are other factors leads someone to become a terrorist. So all of this really important, really fascinating information. And I'm not going to get too political, even though with today's podcast episode, I suspect I'm going to annoy quite a few people with some of my comments. about the far right and other extremist ideologies. So why not start in the personal update to annoy people though? But if you look at the Israel and the Palestine war and the genocide at the moment, because let's face it, it is a genocide, and I am going to die on that hill. By understanding what makes a terrorist, you can actually understand why Israel's genocide isn't going to destroy Hamas, and why it's only going to inspire more Palestinians to join Hamas possibly in the future. So it's a brilliant book. It's fascinating, and once you learn this information, you can apply it to real world situations. So that is the forensic psychology of terrorism and hostage taking, available from all major ebook retailers. You can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, local bookstore, and local library if you requested. And if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, then now you can at selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, and Google Play, and selected library systems like Overdrive, Baker & Taylor, and Biblioteca. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons, and as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you all want it to continue. So if you want to become a patron of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can, including lots of exclusive blog posts, which will be made into podcast episodes for weeks, months, or even years. So if you want to become a patron, then please head on over to patreon.com/the psychology of our podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-time basis, then please head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Con So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be looking at what is radicalisation and what the science of radicalisation in children. It's a brilliant episode and I'm really looking forward to it. So let's dive into it. What is radicalisation? Previously, I think it's fair to say, in our ignorance as a society, we only needed to be concerned about children being radicalised by Islamic extremists, because this was the narrative that was pushed on to us. Yet now we understand radicalisation can happen towards any ideology, including incels, far right, misogyny, white supremacy, and on and on and on. There are a lot of destructive far right ideologies the young people can be radicalised by, and as educators and aspiring and qualified psychologists, we need to be aware of radicalisation and the signs. Because once we recognise the signs of radicalisation, then we need to support our young people so that they don't adopt these toxic, destructive ideologies and ultimately do not take up action against these innocent minority groups based on the lies of others. For example, when incels demand and shoot up women because of incels' toxic and ill-informed beliefs. As a result, radicalisation is the process where anyone, including adults, start to support and get involved in extremist ideologies. These ideologies are normally political or religious, but they can be made up of other beliefs too. For instance, I don't really think incel or white supremacy beliefs are based on a religion, and they are political to a point, but not really. I think incel beliefs are more based on social beliefs instead. Anyway, radicalisation can be devastating to children, their families, as well as their communities. People might be tempted to believe that radicalisation is only about beliefs, so cognitive processes, but we know that our cognitive processes can lead to action and behaviours in the right situation. Therefore, radicalisation can lead to physical and violent behaviours, like shooting up a group of black people and this is why it is critical to help protect children and young people against radicalisation. In addition, children tend to be the focus of anti-radicalisation work, whereas young people are more likely to be radicalised compared to other age groups, since their worldview is still developing and their worldview can influence their relationships, decisions, and future prospects. For instance, if a young person gets involved in white supremacy during their teenage years, they become racist and physically violent towards black people, and then they be a black person within an inch of their life. Then they will hopefully be arrested, charged, and sent to a prison for so. Equally, I hope that they will be de-radicalised too. Yet, because of their violent behaviour, they've lost years of their life. They have a criminal record, and this will impact their employability for the rest of their life. This is all because of radicalisation. What is the process of radicalisation? Despite the path towards radicalisation being slightly different for everyone, there are a lot of patterns that set a child or young person down the similar gradual path towards becoming radicalised. Firstly, the child is exposed to extremist ideas through online forums, friends, community groups, family members, or social media, as well as sometimes extremists target vulnerable young people to recruit them to the cause. And this isn't exclusive to Islamic extremist groups, like the mainstream narrative would have us believe. Also, as I talk in my book, Applied Psychology, there are a lot of different factors that can lead someone towards radicalisation. These include low self-esteem, feelings of injustice, social isolation, as well as the need to belong. Generally, the four key stages of radicalisation are exposure, so a child is exposed to the extremist beliefs or materials for the first time. Engagement is when the young person starts to show an interest in these beliefs and starts to explore these ideas further. Thirdly, you have adoption, where the young person adopts these extremist beliefs as their own. Finally, you have action, where the young person takes steps towards supporting and or openly participating in extremist activity. These include donating money or sharing videos or other content online, or joining the extremist organization. To use an example of a white supremacy, a young person might see a meme online that they find funny. Then the young person might explore these white supremacy memes, online videos, and racist comments in more depth, and want to understand white supremacy. Afterwards, the young person starts to agree with white supremacy and starts to take on the racist beliefs as their own. Finally, the young person might start sharing racist videos, talking to their friends about racist views and why non-whites are plaguing society, and they might vote for racist candidates or donate money towards racist organisations, as well as that they might campaign against non-whites living in their area. What are the signs of radicalisation? This is the section I'm really interested in for my job to do next week, and I strongly believe at first, when we think about the signs of radicalisation, there are the clear ones. Clear, I say in air quotes, because whilst you might associate being alone, vulnerable, and physically aggressive as signs of radicalisation, and they are signs, there are so many more subtle signs of radicalisation too. Moreover, it's useful to note that some signs of radicalisation might be crystal clear, like glorifying extremist figures, sharing beliefs in conspiracy theories, and using extremist language. But a lot of the other signs are a lot more subtle, and they develop over time, as well as some of these signs are perfectly normal when they occur alone. Nonetheless, it is when these signs occur together and there are changes in behaviour, that is when it is a cause for concern the child might be at risk of radicalisation. A first sign of radicalisation is that a child or young person loses interest in their schoolwork and hobbies. And that on its own isn't too bad because most children don't want to be at school or focus on their work, and one of the symptoms of depression is that they lose pleasure and interest in the things that you used to enjoy. Yet when we consider other signs, this is a lot more alarming. Another sign of radicalisation is that the child or young person becomes withdrawn and sure they spend more time alone than normal. Again, it doesn't sound too alarming because there are some children who are naturally more lonely than others. When I was a kid, I could have been called lonely because I didn't have many friends. I didn't hang out with anyone after school, amongst other reasons, except for my friends at the Sea Scouts. Yet, what makes losing interest in schoolwork and normal hobbies and withdrawal signs of radicalisation is that they make a younger person long for connection and friends. Sadly, extremist ideology can seem very tempting, and the manipulators and recruiters behind these ideologies are very skilled at convincing young people that this is where they belong. A third sign of radicalisation is when young people use language that mirrors extremist rhetoric or the language sounds scripted. This isn't one that I've heard before, but I completely agree. Thinking back to online clips that I've seen and then blocked. It's why I don't go on Twitter much these days. It's just a far right breeding ground as far as I'm concerned. Believers in extremist ideologies always sound the same because they use a scripted language that they've learned online from other people to support their extremist views and defend their beliefs against any other people who try to challenge them. A fourth sign is that a young person or child might show increased frustration, obsessive behavior, and anger. Again, these extremist ideologies are very effective at inciting, tapping into hate, and cultivating anger within people. You only need to look at the situation in UK politics this week to see how the major political parties are using immigration and refugees as a scapegoat for Westminster's issues. Instead, immigrants aren't the issue, because personally, what annoys me as a rape survivor is that there are thousands of rapes in the UK every year. Yet the few times an immigrant commits sexual violence, everyone goes mad, but my rapist was a white man. No one cared. Anyway, this isn't a political show, and I've likely already annoyed enough people, so let's continue, shall we? Additionally, other signs of radicalisation include sharing hateful views, memes, content, and symbols on social media, spending more time online, and becoming increasingly disrespectful and intolerant of other people and their different viewpoints. Personally, even though I am steadfast in my views, I still like to hear, listen, and try to understand other people and where they're coming from. I will likely never agree with these viewpoints, but I am interested in listening, and just because people hold different beliefs to me, it doesn't automatically make them bad people. Radicalized people do not believe in that, and they will not tolerate people with different views. And ultimately, another sign of radicalization is that a young person will show more of a focus on one subject, like given a political conflict or immigration. If we look at the far right, they are always focusing on immigration, because they do not care about the evidence that shows that high levels of immigration do not lead to increases in sexual violence, and immigrants do not drain the benefit system, and so on. A final sign of radicalization is that a young person changes their friendship groups suddenly. On its own, this might not seem like a major concern because it's normal for children and young people, to change social groups and identities like clothing. But when you combine these signs with other signs of radicalization, then this can get a lot more concerning, especially if there is already a social group at a school that is known for their racist viewpoints, and new younger people are joining that friendship group. Conclusion. Ultimately, talking about radicalisation and extremism is never a fun topic, and it's always heart-wrenching to know there are people out there and extremist ideologies that want to harm our young people. There are monsters out there that want to take advantage of the loneliness, mental health difficulties, and the need to belong that drives us all, including our children. This is why it's so important that we talk about radicalisation, and most importantly, how to recognise the signs of radicalisation so we can support our young people and hopefully de-radicalise them. In addition to prevent radicalisation, some general tips and techniques include teaching children how to critically think about the information they see and hear online, helping children and young people understand how to verify online content through media literacy skills, and creating a safe space for a healthy discussion and debate around controversial topics. Going back to my last point, I know it is tempting for teachers, schools, and parents to simply avoid talking about controversial topics. Yet, in my experience, children and young people will have these conversations regardless. So it is better to have them in a school where they can be controlled, tailored, and fact-checked than online when extremist ideologies can come in and taint and twist the entire conversation towards their extremist agenda. In addition, you can prevent radicalisation by providing a confidential support system where students can express concerns in private. You can help children to build resilience so young people can challenge extremist narratives and help parents become more aware of online risks as well as the signs of radicalisation too. You also need to report a child at risk of radicalisation to the safeguarding officer at your organisation and education setting too. Finally, even though radicalisation from Islamic extremists hasn't been on the news so much in recent years, this really doesn't mean that radicalisation is over and our children and young people aren't at risk anymore. Instead, children and young people are now at risk of white supremacy, the far right, the anti-immigration lot, misogynists, incels, and the manosphere, and so many other extremist threats. That radicalisation is still very present, very real, and it can be devastating to our children. This is why we need to learn the signs, support children at risk of radicalisation, and always be focusing on preventing radicalisation as much as possible. I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did. This is all critical information I'm going to need for my job to do next week. But this is also just really interesting. It's important to talk about. And given the political situation all over the world, this is even more important than ever before. Radicalisation is something that we've got to fight against and just be aware of. And if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Forensic Psychology of Terrorism and Hostage Taking. It's a brilliant book, and I know you're going to learn a lot from it. And if you want to support the podcast on an ongoing basis, then please check out patreon.com/The Psychology of a Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Conor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwiley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.